I am a political prisoner. I was put in prison for practicing.
Wait a minute, you're a political
politics.
prisoner? Nelson Mandela was a political prisoner. Political prisoners have no due process and are unjustly jailed. You had a jury convict you. You had appeals courts look at your sentencing, and you even appealed to the Supreme Court twice, and they refused to hear you. So you're hardly a political prisoner.
Well, first of all, Nelson Mandela went to before a court. He was convicted in a court of law. I had nearly 8 years to read books.
Right, by a racist apartheid government.
That's correct.
And not a jury of his peers.
I bet you if you were to ask Nelson Mandela whether he thought the process was fair back in the early 60s in South Africa, he would say what I'm saying today, and that is the shocking fact.
I just got to stop you. I'm sorry. As someone who's worked in South Africa and saw apartheid, the idea that you are comparing yourself to somebody who has actually been railroaded by an apartheid system is just nuts and, frankly, like offensive.
Well, no, you're the one making the comparison, not me. I didn't bring up Nelson Mandela. You did.
Right. You're saying, like him, you were railroaded by an all-white jury for an oppressive regime?
No. No, I hear again, you're putting words in my mouth. I never said that either.
Okay.
The jury had some representation from African Americans. No, what I'm saying is that I was thrown in prison and spent nearly 8 years in prison for practicing politics, for seeking campaign contributions without a quid pro quo, no express quid pro quo. And if I was given the same standard Senator Menendez was given, I could very well have been in the U.S. Senate instead of where I was. Now, I'm not complaining that I'm not in the Senate, but I am complaining that I was sent to prison by a handful of corrupt prosecutors who are abusing their power. They're uncontrolled, and they're the ones that Chief Justice Breyer talked about when he said that our country is in trouble because of these uncontrolled prosecutors who can do just about anything they want to do and are using their power to go after government officials for what he called routine practices.
So let me just ask you.
That's what I went to prison for.
Okay, let me just ask you that. So you're saying it's corrupt prosecutors. Do you know who the guy is who actually approved the wiretap, the phone tap on you was? It was Michael Mukasey, the Attorney General at the time. He's actually a Trump supporter now and a Trump defender. He was a George Bush appointee. So the idea that he's one of the corrupt prosecutors, the guy who actually tapped your phones and actually gathered all the evidence against you?
No, I think he got he signed off on what the prosecutor Fitzgerald
So he was fooled by corrupt prosecutors.
I think that he was given some information and he agreed to do the wiretaps, and then they had wiretaps that if they played all the tapes, which they didn't do, they put a seal order on the tapes, wouldn't allow me to play tapes in court. Tape recordings that they made that prove that everything I'm saying is true about what they did to me. I think the result would have been very different.
It wasn't prosecutors who convicted you, found you guilty. It was actually a jury who found you guilty, and that's our system. You also then were able to appeal, and you appealed to the circuit court, and twice, I believe, and they actually upheld your conviction. So other judges, a higher court, the U.S. Seventh Circuit, they looked at the evidence again. They said it was overwhelming. That's a quote. They upheld your conviction. And then you twice had the opportunity to apply to the Supreme Court to hear your arguments. And you know what? They refused because they said your argument doesn't hold up. The very argument you are making right now was looked at by the Seventh Circuit, by the Supreme Court. It was heard in the courtroom, and no one bought it. The Illinois Senate unanimously voted to remove you. Everyone in the Illinois House also voted, Democrats and Republicans, to impeach you, except for one person. You know who that was? Your sister-in-law. I mean, give me a break.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but let me fill in some of the facts that you don't seem to have. First and foremost, when a prosecutor comes out and arrests a sitting governor with a SWAT team and announces a big lie, the sale of a Senate seat, which incidentally was reversed by the appellate court.
Correct.
They ruled that the discussions about the Senate seat were routine politics, log rolling.
Correct. They still upheld your conviction. They upheld your conviction.
They did not. They reversed those charges. And
Those
they
charges,
vacated my
you know
sentence.
what, you had
Then-
like, how many charges do you have against you? Like 15, 16? Yes, they threw out a couple of charges. There were still enough charges
and so
for a judge to then look at it and say, you know what, the sentence still stands. But go ahead. I interrupted.
Let me ask, do you know what those charges were that were upheld? Do you know what they were and what they involved? They involved, do you, Anderson? Because I can tell you if you don't.
Yeah, I actually do, but go ahead.
Requests for campaign contributions,
right,
where
extorting
nobody was
a
promised
children's
anything.
hospital.
Again, it's extortion if there's evidence of a quid pro quo, of an express quid pro quo,
you don't
of threatening somebody,
come on, you're a
or
smart
promising
guy.
someone.
To
None of that
extort
was
somebody,
in the evidence.
To
Go
extort
ahead.
somebody, you don't have to say, I am now extorting you. I am now going to threaten you. I am now going to promise you something, a quid for a pro. I mean, it doesn't work that way.
It does work that way. The United States Supreme Court in 1991, the highest court in the land, Anderson, established the rules for fundraising. And they said that routine political requests for campaign
that was the argument you made in court, that this was all routine
only
fundraising.
bribery or extortion.
Right.
It's only a crime if there's an express quid pro quo, one thing for another. There was never evidence of that. Okay. They never proved that. They simply said that if there's a connection in the mind of somebody, that then is the standard.
But
the
sir,
standard
you know
they
the jury...
I have to make this point.
Okay, go ahead.
The jury made the right call based upon the fake law that the prosecutors gave them. They used the standard against me that the Supreme Court in the McCormick case said was not the law. Think about that. They used a standard the Supreme Court said was not the law. How different is that from from a dirty cop planning a murder weapon to frame an innocent man?
Okay, all of this sounds good on TV.
It's all true.
Okay, it all sounds good on TV and to people who haven't actually looked at this. But you know what? The jury actually looked at the evidence. Actually, you had two juries looking at evidence. You also have now had the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals looking at the evidence, and they said it was overwhelming against you. And they do know the law. And on top of that, the Supreme Court it was looking at this great injustice that you're talking about, and they said, you know what? Twice, we're not going to look at this because, you know what? It should stand.
Oh, can I answer that?
Yeah.
The Supreme Court only takes 2% of the cases. It's very hard to get into the Supreme Court. Now, with regard to the appellate court, shockingly disappointing that they would uphold an unlawful standard. I would simply say to your viewers and to you, take a look at the McCormick case, 1991. It establishes the standard. Senator Menendez was given the lawful standard, and his case was ultimately thrown out by a judge. They used the standard the court said was not the law, and that is basically a dirty cop planning a murder weapon to frame an innocent man. And then you talk about the primacy of the Supreme Court. Let me remind you that in 1857, the best judge in America, Chief Justice Taney, said that Dred Scott, a black man, was not entitled to the same rights as anybody else. And so they don't always get it right either. Yes. And I've learned something in these 8 years, and that is that we have a racist and corrupt criminal justice system in many areas. Right. And this is why I hope one day maybe you'll join me in the fight to reform our criminal justice system and actually do something about the problem of over-sentencing blacks and Latinos.
Right.
I learned that when I was there.
Okay. What's sad is that you hadn't actually learned that when you mattered, when you actually were the governor. You talk about working for the criminal justice reform. There's a lot of people in Chicago, there's a lot of people in Illinois who actually spit up when you say that. Because when you were actually in power and when you were actually governor and you could have helped thousands of people with clemency cases, you blew it off. The governor after you inherited a huge backlog, nearly 3,000 clemency petitions that you failed to review. In fact, you were sued you were sued as governor by Cabrini Green Legal Aid to try and pressure you to actually pay attention to clemency cases instead of extorting people for money and campaign contributions. So it's a little ironic and frankly a little sad and pathetic and hypocritical, you talking about commuting, you get a commutation of a sentence, which is within the president's right, but you ignored a whole hell of a lot of other people who are hoping you might give them clemency when you actually mattered. So actually, you know what? I'm happy to, there wasn't a question, it was a statement. I'd be happy to work with people on criminal justice reform, but I wouldn't work with you.
Okay, can I answer that statement and question? Okay, I'd like to address that. Look, when you've been put where I was and you have all the time that I was given to think and look back on some of the things you might have done different, that's certainly an area that you talked about that I certainly wish I would have done more on. There's no question about that. That's among my biggest regrets. I didn't know how corrupt the criminal justice system was until it did it to me. And that was a wake-up call. Having said that, I want to say one thing about me as governor. When the cases came to me, and I was given files about people who were seeking clemency or pardons, I acted appropriately.
Actually, no,
My
they sat on
regret
your
is
desk,
that I
and
didn't
that's why
make
you
that
were sued. I mean, that is
But
the
I
case.
did clemencies and I did
Right.
pardons. I didn't do nearly enough. It wasn't a priority. I would acknowledge that. I didn't go to the office every day doing that. Instead, I was giving health care to all the children, free public transportation to our seniors and the disabled.
Actually, you were
but I regret that
holding
very
up
much.
money to hospitals in order to get campaign contributions. But listen,
But
Governor,
no, see, that's a big lie. They got $8 million from me, and I was sent to prison for things that aren't crimes.
They got it after you
I
had left.
promised that I ordered it before that happened, and it didn't. They got it while I was governor.
You're besmirching prosecutors who actually who are no longer in government, but prosecutors are important in our system, and you are going after the very basis of our justice system, which has plenty of problems. But part of the thing is you got out. You do have an obligation to at least admit what you did wrong, and you refuse to do that, and you're creating a whole new alternate universe of facts. And that may be big in politics today, but it's still, frankly, just bullshit.